For those of you who are always on the go, remember mindful moments.
Bite-sized knowledge, right?
Exactly. Perfect for those mental snacks throughout the day. Narrated by AI, too. We tend to think of Supreme Court decisions as these solid, unchanging things.
Right, like these granite monuments to impartial justice chiseled straight from a legal precedent.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
It's pretty straightforward, huh?
Yeah.
But what if the ground underneath those monuments wasn't so stable?
Interesting analogy.
What if personal experiences, like the things that shape these justices, or even just like a slip of the tongue could actually nudge, or even like tilt the scales of American law?
That's a compelling challenge to that traditional view of the law.
It is. And is the question we're going to try to tackle today as we deep dive into Jeffrey Toobin's The Oath.
Okay, the oath.
Specifically, we're zeroing in on what might seem, at first glance, like a pretty minor detail, the slightly messed up presidential oath during Obama's first inauguration. Now, you might be thinking, so what? But this little hiccup and the reaction to it, honestly, give us a crazy good window into how constitutional interpretation works, the personalities at the top of our legal system, and the people advising the president.
It really does. Like, you get a sense of those behind-the-scenes dynamics, the human element. It's fascinating.
So where are we going with this deep dive today?
Yeah.
We're dissecting this whole Obama oath situation, right? We want to understand how legal philosophies of these heavy hitters like Chief Justice Roberts, White House counsel Greg Craig, and how they're all grappling with different legal schools of thought, like textualism, versus this idea of unenumerated rights.
Right, right.
So much happening at once. We really want to peel back the layers and reveal the human drama behind what appears to be, at least on the surface, a purely formal legal act.
Sounds like we have a lot to unpack.
Absolutely. So let's rewind the clock back to the morning after the inauguration, January 21st, 2009.
Okay, the parties are over, the excitement's dying down.
Right. And Greg Craig, the new White House counsel, fresh on the job, gets this call from David Barron.
Now, for those who aren't familiar, Barron is the Principal Deputy Assistant Attorney General in the Office of Legal Counsel. He had been looking into something kind of strange about the oath from the day before.
Yeah, it seems like in all the inauguration craziness, neither Craig nor Barron had really paid close attention to the exact words Chief Justice Roberts used.
Makes sense.
But the next morning, Barron sees some news reports and decides to dig a little deeper.
Smart move.
And what he finds starts setting off alarm bells within the Obama administration's legal team.
And what exactly did he find?
Well, Barron really honed in on this one specific thing, the exact wording of the presidential oath, which the Constitution lays out very clearly.
And I believe it's worth reiterating for our listeners. It goes, I, name, do solemnly swear that I will faithfully execute the office of President of the United States and will, to the best of my ability, preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution of the United States.
Right. Like every single word there is there for a reason, right?
Absolutely.
And the error, which seems pretty small, is that Chief Justice Roberts says that I will execute the office of President to the United States faithfully.
Wait, so he swapped a phrase around?
He did. It's subtle, but in legal terms, it's kind of a big deal.
So it's not just a matter of grammar, right? There's more to this concern.
You're exactly right. To understand why Barron was so worried, we got to step back and look at this long-running debate in constitutional law. For a long time, a lot of liberals have been pushing this idea of unenumerated rights.
Unenumerated rights. Those rights that aren't specifically spelled out in the Constitution.
Exactly. But they're still thought to exist because of the Constitution's broader principles.
Like the right to privacy, which has underpinned so many landmark decisions, right? Things like reproductive rights.
Exactly. And then on the other side, you have this rising group of conservatives who are pushing back hard against this whole idea of unenumerated rights.
People like Justice Scalia, right?
Right.
Big proponent of textualism.
Yeah, Justice Scalia and Justice Thomas. Textualism, meaning they believe the Constitution should only be interpreted based on what the words literally say.
And originalism, which kind of goes hand in hand with that. Originalism means sticking to what the words meant when they were first written.
Right. And under those stricter views, since there's no direct mention of privacy in the Constitution, well, you can see how that leads to really different legal outcomes.
So when Barron hears this slight change in the oath, he's not sweating the grammar. He's seeing it through this lens of constitutional interpretation.
Right. If you're arguing that every single word in the Constitution matters, then messing up the presidential oath, which is like the ultimate source of presidential power, could, at least theoretically, be a problem.
Right. Someone with a more textualist viewpoint might say, hold on, even a tiny change could throw the whole thing off.
Exactly. So Barron, being cautious,
Yeah.
tells Craig they should just have Chief Justice Roberts and President Obama redo the oath, just to be safe, right?
Makes sense. Better safe than sorry.
And you know what's funny? Craig's reaction to this is priceless. He admits that during the actual ceremony, he was so busy with the signing and all the logistics that he barely even heard the oath or Obama's speech.
Wow. I mean, you can imagine, right? All that pressure, all those moving parts. He's probably thinking, did I put the right pen back in the box?
Right. And this just shows you how even in these huge historical moments, the people at the center of it are dealing with these really human everyday concerns.
Yeah.
And get this, there's this whole other layer to this story. It turns out there was a standard presidential oath card, like a little card with the oath written on it.
Ah, interesting. I've never heard of that.
Me neither. Seems like this Supreme Court staffer, Vanessa Yarnell, along with this guy, Scott Harris, the chief deputy clerk, put it together.
For Rehnquist originally, right?
Yeah. Then they updated it for Obama. But here's where it gets interesting. Yarnell emails the card to Cami Morrison, a staffer working for Vice President Biden. But for whatever reason, maybe a missed email or a lost file, Morrison never sends it to the Obama team.
Oh, no. Classic communication breakdown.
So the key point is that neither Obama nor Greg Craig nor anyone on their team knew this card even existed until after the inauguration.
Wow. So much for that backup plan.
Oh, I know, right? And you know what Chief Justice Roberts said when someone offered to rehearse the oath with him a week before? He's like, nah, I'm good. I know the oath.
Confidence can be a dangerous thing.
Seriously. Okay, back to Craig on January 21st. He just learned about the mistake in the oath, and now he finds out about this oath card that never even reached them. And it's at this point that the whole thing starts to feel really serious.
Right. With all the scrutiny and the debates about interpreting every word of the Constitution, you can imagine how that little mistake in the oath could have turned into a legal nightmare.
Exactly.
So I imagine they felt they needed to fix this right away.
Yeah. Craig realizes, okay, this is big, and I barely even heard the oath myself. They had to fix this, right?
Absolutely.
And Chief Justice Roberts, to his credit, was totally on board. He even used this great phrase. He said he always believed in built-in suspenders.
Huh. I love that.
He agreed that redoing the oath was the right thing to do.
A very human response.
So they quickly planned this private ceremony for the next day, January 22nd, in the White House map room. And they kept it super low-key, no TV cameras, just a few print reporters. They didn't want this to blow up into some big political thing, you know?
Right. Makes sense. They just wanted to fix the mistake quietly and move on.
Now, this whole situation reminded me of this YouTube channel, Mindful Moments. They analyze audiobooks with AI so you can grasp the main ideas quickly.
Interesting.
It's like what we're doing here with the oath, right?
Yeah.
We're pulling out the key insights for our listeners. Sometimes these hidden stories and details can give you these aha moments, you know?
Yeah, totally. And this whole thing with the oath is a perfect example. What seems like a tiny detail actually reveals a lot about the people involved and what was going on in the legal and political world at that time.
Right. And speaking of the people involved, let's talk about Obama and Chief Justice Roberts.
Yeah.
Their backgrounds, their legal philosophies. Toobin does such a good job of highlighting the contrast.
Okay, so you've got Obama, who grew up in inner city Chicago, became president of the Harvard Law Review.
And then you've got Roberts, Republican background, also managed the Harvard Law Review, but in a different era with a different focus.
Yeah. And as Toobin points out, the book really emphasizes how their experiences, particularly in Chicago, kind of shaped their views differently.
It's so interesting, right? Obama's exposed to poverty, this very liberal, democratic world. Roberts, on the other hand, grows up in a more affluent Republican environment. Even at Harvard, they're both stars on the Law Review, but they're there at different times, exposed to different intellectual currents.
Different influences, different perspectives.
One of the most insightful things for me was learning about Obama's view on the law. Like, is it the best tool for social change? He clearly admired these civil rights lawyers, but didn't see himself following that exact path.
Yeah, it's like he saw elections and grassroots movements as more effective ways to make big changes in society.
Right. And this comes up early on when he's talking about the San Antonio Independent School District v. Rodriguez case. He was kind of skeptical about whether courts could really solve problems like wealth inequality.
Yeah, that pragmatism seems like a hallmark of his career.
It really does. Even with his personal beliefs, like gun control, which he really cared about, he sometimes shifted his stance or was super careful about how he talked about it, depending on the political situation. Like when he ran for Senate in Illinois.
Makes you realize how calculated he was.
Yeah, always thinking strategically. And now compare that with John Roberts. His whole career is basically a reflection of the rise of the conservative legal movement.
Starting with those clerkships, right? First with Judge Friendly, then Justice Rehnquist, then working in the Solicitor General's office under Kenneth Starr. That's a deep dive into conservative legal thought.
Yeah. And there's this great speech Roberts gave where he talks about Justice Rehnquist's legacy. He basically says that the court, under Rehnquist, shifted to a much stricter text-based interpretation of the Constitution.
More focused on the literal words, less on subjective interpretation.
Exactly. And all this really helps us understand why Obama voted against confirming Roberts as Chief Justice. He acknowledges Roberts' talent, but he's really worried about how Roberts will handle those really tough cases.
You know, those cases where there isn't a clear answer based on existing law.
Right. He talks about this idea of the 5%. Those cases where a judge's personal values are going to shape the outcome, especially when it comes to social justice and individual rights. That's where Obama was concerned.
It's like he was saying, look, anyone can follow the rules when it's easy. It's those tough cases that reveal who you really are.
Exactly. But here's the interesting part. Even after opposing Roberts, Obama, with his super strategic mindset, says the best way to get judges who care about social justice is to, well, win elections.
Because that's how you get to appoint judges.
Right. For him, it wasn't just about winning in court. It was about winning politically to shape the courts in the long run.
Interesting strategy.
And, we got to remember that this whole Supreme Court isn't just one big happy family.
Right. Each justice has their own philosophy, their own perspective.
Totally. You've got Scalia with his hardcore textualism, Ginsburg fighting for equality, Kennedy often a swing vote, focusing on things like individual liberty, especially in campaign finance, and Thomas, sticking to originalism, even willing to overturn old precedents.
What a mix. It's like a legal all-star team, but with different playbooks.
It is. So
Yeah.
when we look back at this whole thing with the messed up oath, it becomes clear that it's not just some funny little story.
Right. It's more than that.
It really shows us these deeper tensions, these disagreements about how to interpret the Constitution, the different lives and beliefs that shape our judges, and even how these little human mistakes can have a ripple effect on these super important processes.
Yeah, it's like those tiny cracks in the foundation that can eventually lead to bigger problems.
Exactly. And it's a reminder that even in these places where everything seems so official and by the book, human nature is still a factor. You miss an email, you get distracted, you misspeak, and suddenly you're facing these massive legal and constitutional questions.
And those questions are only going to get more complex as the Supreme Court tackles bigger issues.
Yeah, absolutely. As we've seen, even something as seemingly simple as an oath can become a flashpoint, revealing these deeper disagreements about the very foundations of our legal system.
It's a reminder that we can't take these things for granted,
Exactly. And it's a reminder that we should all be paying attention, thinking critically, and questioning everything. So if you're into these deep dives, these explorations of the hidden stories that shape our world, hit that subscribe button. Share this episode with your friends who like to get below the surface of things. And if you want to dig even deeper into all this, check out Jeffrey Toobin's The Oath. I'll have a link in the show notes. Keep thinking critically, everyone.